Excellent. All right, everybody. I think I'm going to get us rolling because I want us to have time to talk. We've got such good folks here and so many wonderful things to learn and talk about together. So hi, I'm Mary Lloyd. I'm the education chair for Impact 100 Seattle. For those of you that don't know about us, we are a collective giving circle. It's a global construct. 100 women donate $1,000. We all come together and give a large $100,000 grant to small, local, regional nonprofits here. We are trust-based in our philanthropy approach, so we're really progressive and learning as we go along from our partners and our folks. We are open for membership in year 3. We're going into year 3, so if any of you are interested, I will stick around for a little bit afterwards. You are also always welcome to email me to learn a little bit more about Impact. We've given over $225,000 out so far. We've involved over 150 women at this point. So we're really excited about what's going on. And we've just started to host some education events, and this is a big one for us, a new one. We'd hoped to do a networking piece live and in person, but that didn't quite go the way we had hoped. But thank you all for taking some time tonight, and hopefully the winds won't blow too much and we'll be on for the full time. One more thing before we get going, we are going to use the chat room tonight. We've got some links to share with you. There will be some messages that we'll pass along. If you have any questions, feel free. You may have noticed on the way in, we are going to be recording, and at 8 o'clock, when we go into some breakout sessions, we will stop the recording. That's also a fine time if you're not interested in a breakout group to jump off or turn your cameras off. So we're looking forward to that. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, because we have such a rich panel tonight, and I know we're going to get rolling. I just want everybody to kind of take a little bit of a deep breath. There's quite a few of us on this call, over 30. I love it. And maybe if you can, take a look around your space and focus on something blue. Excellent. Now maybe change your focus and look for something that is soft. Awesome. Finally, just take a second and find something that makes you smile. Love it. Love it. All right, as we focus in, I want you to focus now on Nancy McSharry Jensen, who is the co-founder of the Swing Shift. It's an awesome organization that is all set up to support women in their work searches, if they've taken breaks and want to come back, if they have started something and want to go another direction. I think we all find the longer we've been doing this, there will be times, whether we choose or not, that there are going to be shifts and changes that occur for all of us. The book is an incredible resource. It's got lots of how-tos on interviewing, networking, setting up your resume. It's filled with templates. It's got wonderful, wonderful ideas. And I did want to say, Impact has purchased copies, and we have those available for anyone that would like one. So if you would, at some point tonight in the chat box, you can message me directly and request one. They just arrived at my house, so we'll be signing some and probably delivering to your home. So to save on some postage and say hello. So please let us know that. And without further ado, and Back to Business is the name of the book, but here's Nancy McSharry Jensen. Thanks so much, Nancy.
Oh, thank you, Mary. And hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your evening. This is a really, really important topic that we're discussing tonight, and I'm really excited to be here with you. What I'm really excited about is our panel. And if we can go to the next slide, we have an amazing array of insight from the Puget Sound region here. I'm going to introduce our panelists briefly, and they may tell you a little more about themselves. First, we have Dr. Julie Pham, who's the CEO of Curiosity-Based Consulting and the author of 7 Forms of Respect. Julie has an incredibly broad, both professional and educational experience. She's worked in community engagement, in not-for-profit and in for-profit engagements, and she's got a great eye for how do you bring disparate communities and voices in the same room and how you talk to people together. My husband was very jealous that you were on this call, Julie, and I said, too bad you're on childcare tonight. So thank you for joining us. Laurie Litwack is a former colleague of mine from Microsoft. She has a very deep background. She was at Microsoft for about 20 years, took a break and became the principal of Today Is Your Day, which is a career coaching service. And then she decided, because that wasn't enough, she went back to Microsoft. We talk about this approach as a boomerang, and Laurie did the boomerang thing. And she and I were talking not that long ago about what that was like to have been away and to have gone back. She has a really rich insight into the role of gender parity and gender pay. And so Laurie's perspective on this, both working inside one of the largest corporations in the area, as well as working with women who are looking to shift roles and careers, is incredibly valuable. Your own Elizabeth Jerry, who's the CEO of Cary Grant Skincare and an Impact 100 member. You know her from Impact, and you might know her from being the CEO of Wide Ruled Rebel, which I have hard time saying, but it's a great, I have, my kids use the notebooks, we have them all. She, like Julie, has a very broad range of experience, everything from working in the startup community to serving in a strategic role at very, very, very large retailers. And so we're delighted to have Elizabeth's perspective on this. Erin McDonald, some of whom you may know as Erin Kelly, is the CEO of Spilt Milk Nannies. And Erin's business is a regional business. She started as a nanny when she was in college at UW and took over running Spilt Milk Nannies, and it has expanded throughout the Seattle area and down into Oregon. And so Erin's perspective on what has happened in the last year and a half, particularly from the demand for and provision of childcare in our homes and communities, is super, super important. And then there's me. So this is who we're talking to tonight. I hope that that was enough information. If you want more, we have everybody's contact information at the end. Please look everybody up on LinkedIn. This is an incredible array. So thank you all for coming. I want to talk, if we can go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on right now with women in the workplace. And this is going to set up our conversation. There is a massive recalibration of priorities for women in the workforce right now. And these are some data points that I find particularly compelling. 48% of working women right now are actively looking for new opportunities. And the two things that are being cited are this notion of the Great Resignation, which some of you may have heard of, as well as the she-cession, which is when, so many women stepped back to take care of their children and their families because of lack of childcare and because your children were everywhere. There's some other pieces of information that I think feed this recalibration of priorities. 41% of currently employed women are going to shift. 54% of them of Gen Z are going to do it, and they're looking to do this in the next 6 months. So this is pretty new data. It is much. It's a much more rapid shift in job movement than we've seen in the past. The other 2 points here in terms of this recalibration of priorities is we've all been home for 18 months, or now 20. millennials are proactively planning extended career breaks. Unlike some of us who just, got out of school, goofed around for a couple of weeks and then went and got a job because their parents said they had to. Carol knows this. Carol Hubbard and I are old friends. Most millennials right now are proactively saying, I'm going to work for 2 or 3 years and then I'm going to take a break. And it might be for family, and it might be for travel, and it might be for something else. But they are looking at a longer time to work, and they're looking at segmenting it. So these and this is because they have other things to do besides work. This I just read the other day, and I guess it shouldn't surprise me, but it did. 1/3 of women's jobs don't cover their living expenses. I know, Laurie, it blows my mind, but women are working. They're just working to make sure that they can hang on to their job. Maybe they're getting benefits. So this is what's going on in terms of people who are working right now. Okay. Now, if we go to the next slide, and then there's people who have taken a break, right? There's a ton of returning workers in the mix right now. 5 million women left the workforce because of the pandemic. The US Department of Labor has reported on this very widely. And so a lot of these people are saying, I don't want and I can't return back to the model that I originally was hired into. Things have changed, and they've changed radically. Another data point that I think is interesting and doesn't get talked about as much is that 25% of people who are age 50 plus took a pandemic enforced retirement, right? They were either pushed out or they, their job went out of, they lost their jobs, but these folks still need and want to work. They still have money they need to put into their retirement accounts. They have kids in college. And so that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it is also a very real issue. And then this is where we started our business. 49% of American women leave and want to return. And I'm guessing that many of you, if you haven't done that, you know someone who has, and it's usually kid number 2, or you have a family member that needs care. And so that's usually why people leave. And the reality is Harvard Business Review did a study on this. They all want to come back. So that's the data points. And so I want to kind of get out of there and let's go to the gallery view, because knowing that the future of women at work is changing so much, and it's really at a crossroads right now. Knowing that people are really considering hard, what am I going to do next? What's the right thing for me and for my family and for my pocketbook? I mean, it's great to say, well, what am I going to do next? And I want to have a job with meaning, but let's be real, right? We work to make money. Yes, we work for meaning, but people are working because they have bills to pay, and that is okay. I want everybody to understand that it is okay to work to make money. It's super valuable to do that. Given that Impact 100 Seattle connects women to each other and with local nonprofits and works to harness the strength of your community to support change, let's talk about these issues with an eye towards what can happen to change these things. So I'm going to get right in. Panel, get ready. Regarding this 41% who are looking to shift, what factors are being taken into consideration here? What are the impacts, both positive and negative? Because there are some good things that have come out here. And I think we talked before everybody jumped on. Julie, I'm going to ask you to start with that, and then maybe Laurie, if you can jump in.
So thank you, Nancy. I'm an optimist. I always look for silver linings.
Yep.
And so I'm just going to start with some of, I think, the positives, which is I think that the pandemic has made it. I know a lot of people who've actually become entrepreneurs. I became an entrepreneur. I started my own company in January, and
Yep.
And I would not have done it if not for the fact that I didn't have to worry about rent, right? And all the overhead. And so I look at other people who are just, wait a minute, maybe they lost their job because unwillingly lost their job, and yet it's pushing them to think, well, actually, what do I want to do? I have a friend who had a great job, and she actually chose, and she got a little bored, and she started a floral business, and now it's doing really well. And she actually decided to leave her job, her full-time job, into to start this. So I think that is definitely, I'm seeing a lot more entrepreneurship and kind of leaning in and just, what do I want? And for those who are staying at their companies, I also see people who are they realize actually that they can have, that there's leverage, and it's like, how do I get my promotion? How do I because actually it's hard to hire remotely. And so people do, I think I see a lot of companies saying like, hey, how do we retain the people who we have?
Right.
So yeah. So
right.
So those are the pluses. And then I think the big minus is just having the childcare. And I can't really speak to that because I don't have children, and yet I know a lot of my friends who really struggle with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Laurie, you're on the other side of things. You work for a very large employer. What do you say on this?
All right. So I'll say that the pandemic helped me and people both that I coach, as well as people who I work with, get more clear on what's important, right? Things got harder. Things got busier, crazier. And in certainly for me and my team, we had more work than we were ever going to be able to do. And so we had to get clear on both, what does it mean to be effective? And so that was positive, like what is the most important, but also what is meaningful in my life? Because some non-negotiables, as work hours went up, we had to start saying, what does it mean to be present for my family and to be there for me? And so one of the things I had to do, and I still struggle with, is getting clear on what is non-negotiable for me. So for me, I say Friday afternoons, I'm done, right? I know that there's plenty of work to do, but I can't do it anymore. And so some of those things I translate into my job and having real conversations with team members. And stop with the fluff, stop with the I'm fine, because we know we're not, right? And that is really hugely helpful, to be able to have those conversations, to say, what do you need? How do you move forward? And what does it mean to potentially step back? I have the luck of having my kids mostly grown up, and but I have many team members who have kids, and they have taken, like the men have taken leave. I love seeing that. I love seeing them being full participants in their family. And I know that it sets a model for their kids and for their daughters and sons growing up. So having that impact generationally.
Right.
But I also know some of the women who are taking on the additional work. And that to me is the concern. It's having conversations like this to say, get real. What can you really do? And what support do you need? And how are you going to get it?
Right. Right. Because I think for many people, it's just one more damn thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth, I'm going to call you out here. So in addition to having a middle and high schooler, you started yet another business in the middle. Speaking of so Julie mentioned the entrepreneurial focus. I should have put that in my upfronts. Yes, there are more businesses being started by women. And by the way, the biggest community are women of color that are starting businesses during the pandemic. You are working on a couple of startups. What's it been like having kids and doing startup?
So I was actually planning to do a startup before the pandemic hit,
right.
And potentially ill-advisedly, I went ahead and launched a business focusing on environmentally friendly school supplies for middle school and high school students. A massively flawed model, particularly when you're counting on in-school distribution. So I'm going to call it, sometimes things just really, really in no way go as planned, but I do love the support of this community and Nancy, the notebooks. Interestingly though, for me, what I loved in this process was the realization of how much I adored the entrepreneurial process. And because my children are older, it was something we were able to engage in as a family. So some of you on this call actually might even remember when we were doing some of the original grant preparation meetings at the beginning of COVID, I was stamping prototypes of notebooks with my children around me at the table. Granted, you may not have seen it on the screen. But, in my instance, I actually took that information and made the decision to join an existing company partway through the process because I found that connection and that passion. But I loved, and I actually made a note of what Laurie just said about really focusing on what matters to you, where your boundaries are, where it is that you say, I'm going to get up and I am going to walk away right now, because exactly what you just said, there is always going to be more. And so I really like that notion of this is where it is tonight. I am leaving. I am going to this Impact 100 event. And I think that's really powerful.
Right. Thank you. And with any of the panelists, if you want to jump in, can you talk a little bit about the role of social justice and what it plays in the decision making, and maybe whether it's in your decision making or in people that you've worked with? I'll do an all comers on this.
Well, I'm happy to jump in a couple of different ways. So
yeah,
my mission is really around equity in tech. And one of the things that drew me back into the workforce was I did a listening tour before I went back after having run my business for 6-7 years, and said, okay, I'm ready for some other challenges. And I did a listening tour, and I saw and I heard from real people about the culture shift that was happening at Microsoft and in different tech companies. And it's like, that is exciting. That speaks to my heart of what I want to change, right? Because I believe that putting my finger in and making a ripple will ripple out into the universe and change space-time. So I want to make gender equity. I want to make racial equity happen. And a powerful place to do that is from the outside, but also from the inside. And so that was one of the things that really drew me back in, the number of programs and the lived experience of the people I was talking to.
Right. So you went in deliberately saying, I have this issue, I'm going to make sure that I manifest as part of my work here.
Right. I'm going to amplify what is happening, and that culture shift and that focus on equity is something that speaks to my heart, and I intend to drive it forward with all my power.
It's interesting that you say that, Laurie, because I think it's a unique time right now. And Julie, you were talking about this, recruiting and retention, particularly for women and for people that are not, straight white males, is a huge issue, and particularly here in the Puget Sound, but across the US. And I think companies are really grappling with, well, how do we keep the folks that we have? Because there's a lot of other jobs out there, and once we have them, how do we retain them? Because their priorities are not work anymore. And when people come back, like Laurie do, they're saying, yeah, I'm coming back, but I have a focus, which makes me super happy, because that's how change is going to be affected.
So Nancy, to kind of add to answer your question there, one of the reasons why I started my business is because for a long time working in how do we diversify leadership? How do we diversify the workforce, right? And so much of that actually has been focused on recruiting, and that's about representation. And we definitely need to have representation. And what I looked at was this majority of leadership and management books, though, are still written by white men. Actually, we did a study of Amazon's top 100 leadership books, and 88 of them were written by white men.
Yep.
And so the way that I think of that is, yes, representation is great. And that just means that we are, to use this analogy, we are having different actors who are reading the same scripts. And so I think the other thing that we need to work on in terms of ensuring equity in the workplace is also enlarging what we think of as leadership narratives and getting more women and getting more people of color to also change the way that we think about leadership.
Right. That's something that we encountered, interestingly enough. We got our book deal with HarperCollins, and have Sarah, my business partner, and we learned a lot about book publishing. It is so white. It is so male. Only when we were doing the research, only 8% of business books are published by women. But women make up half of the workforce. What's up with that? right? So I think it's pushing everything from what are the resources that are available to what a leader looks like. You're absolutely right. I want to shift gears here and talk a little more about childcare, right? Half of the 5 million women who left during the secession, I have trouble saying that, but a lot are still home because childcare is not accessible and it's not available or affordable. And I'm wondering what the factors are there and what needs to give. And Erin, I'm going to call you out on this one because you have, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what happened with your biz and what you see happening now.
Yeah. Well, it's been wild. I think the biggest thing for me is the mental shift of in the very beginning, I was thinking parents can't go to work, kids can't go to school. I need like all nannies on deck. We're going to be so busy. And then it was the opposite. And so that was really hard for me to grasp of like, I was preparing to be busy and then like nobody needed childcare for months. Right. So I had to completely shift my business. Instead of doing like occasional and flexible childcare, you know, we were really popular for date nights and doctor's appointments and such like that. Instead, I started providing like one nanny per family, and that's not how I usually work. And then on top of that, adding in tutoring and remote learning and everything like that. So everything pretty much shifted. I guess I am grateful for the slowdown in the sense that I did get to take that step back and be like, what's important to me? It's my community, right? So like, I am a small business that survived, and I'm like so proud of that. And I think I did it because of my community and the people that stuck by me. So I think the important positive shift that I took is I now try way harder to support small businesses because of COVID. Now that I've like lived through the pandemic, I'm like, I will go out of my way to find a small business, a woman-owned business, minority-owned business. And I didn't used to be like that. So I'm grateful for that. In terms of childcare, it's insane. I guess I think what needs to give for accessibility is employers to just keep this flexible mindset. That, for example, when I have a mom reach out to me of, I got offered a part-time job, I need like 2 or 3 days a week, a few hours each day. Sometimes I only have one option. I'm like, here's the option I can give you Monday morning and like Thursday afternoon. And I just really pray that employers will be accepting of that because it's kind of all I can offer. And then I think a big part around availability is just recognizing that, again, the pandemic made us realize is that this is like, we need to respect childcare providers. Like we'll never have enough. We need to keep them on board. So it was really hard as a nanny to lose their job, have no income, there's no sick pay, you know, nothing. We went from like working as a second job or third job, just like it's as an income supplement, and then to nothing. So that was extremely hard. So I think supporting childcare providers should be, you know, help availability. And maybe that would have helped me like keep my team a little bit more if I had, you know, benefits to offer them when every single shift got canceled in 1 week. Right.
And I mean, you know, so for those of you that don't know about Spilt Milk Nannies, so Erin she has an array of nannies that she makes available on demand for families that, as she said, originally needed these. I use this myself for date nights, or if you just needed 1 or 2 sitting sessions a week. And so she's hearing both from the families and from the providers. I had a follow-up question for you, Erin. From a provider's perspective, what's the number one thing that they're worried about? Is it the stability or is it safety, or what's the issue from the people that are providing the services?
Good question. I think safety is interesting. It's one thing I think a lot of parents, which is, you know, rightfully so, like very concerned about the children that can't be vaccinated, right? But then they're getting those expectations in line were really hard. I'd have some parents reach out of like, we don't want a sitter with roommates or one that goes to work on site. And I'd be like, okay, I understand, but the only, like most of my sitters are college aged, right? And so they mostly have roommates and they have other jobs, like they need a stable job. Like this type of nannying is a second income. So I think that's really hard to be understanding of both sides of like, it's totally fair to have your expectations with COVID exposure and stuff, but also recognizing like nannies need to go to that other job just as the kids need to go to school and the parents need to go to work. Yeah.
I think that, I think what you're talking about, because everybody it's all been in front of our faces. It's been in our living rooms, in our bedrooms, in our kitchens
Yeah.
over the last year and a half. I think that there's a better appreciation for how people are patching these things together.
Yeah.
Certainly, we have in my household, and as many others. I want to talk a little bit about how members of the Impact 100 community can perhaps use their influence and their privilege. And I will tell you that Mary Lloyd gave me this question, and I think it's a great one. Does the panel have any recommendations about how we can use these special attributes that we all have to help raise all boats? I know that I feel extraordinarily fortunate to be in the position that I'm in. And I, like many of you, I think about, well, how do I do this in a way that can help not just me and my immediate family and friends, but that I can help make things better as we go forward. And I'm wondering if our panelists can talk a little bit about that. Elizabeth, I might ask you to kick this one off.
Yeah. And actually, it's, I think, a pretty nice segue to some of what Erin was saying. I think one of the most important things that we can do is to support our public schools. Public schools play a really pivotal role in our community, not just for the education that they provide, but also for the important resources that they give all families, right? So everything from helping to identify and diagnose problems in students at all ages. Unfortunately, it's become a really strong social safety net in terms of providing food and medical care.
Right.
But it's also a really important and good way to be a part of your community, particularly if you are in one of your regional schools. So I know that for all families, it's not necessarily feasible, but as we look at things that we can do in our community, there are a number of groups that apply for our grants that focus on education, everything from mentorship of individuals to supporting individual schools or teaching advocacy to communities. And some of our grantees in the past have actually done some really incredible work with this. I think also it's a way to meet a whole variety of different people. And so I would encourage you, if you are not already a part of it, I know, Nancy, this is a lot of the way that you and I know one another.
That's right.
Go tour, if you have children, tour your public school, even if you're not necessarily planning to go. Understand what it provides, understand any levies or initiatives that are up, and support the community, because having childcare, having a strong support network is so critical for everyone. And so I do have a little bit of bias on this one. But one of the things that I found really interesting in my own parenting journey is the kinds of needs that my children had from me when they were very little to what it is that they need today, right? So I have oh gosh, how old are they? 13 and 14-year-olds. And those needs when they were potty training or just demanding fishies all the time are very different than today's, where it's how do I navigate this situation with my friends, or how do I do all of these things? So having that strong continuity and community, I think, is important, both as parents, as employees, as leaders, and as community members.
I will say that, I have to agree with you, and my children are both in the public schools here, partly because I want them to see kids who are like them and that are succeeding. My family is a transracial family, so we got a little bit of everything in my house. And I want my kids to understand, look, there are kids that are very well off and have everything, and there are kids that are taking 2 buses to go to, in my case, Garfield High School, because that's going to help them and their immigrant parents get to the next level. And I want my kids to understand that, and that, we've had some very interesting discussions in our house about that, Elizabeth. So I think you and I are on the same page here. Julie, do you have any insights onto this? Because I know particularly one of Julie's many very interesting past jobs, she was the community engagement lead for the Washington Technology and Industry Association. So she knows a lot about building community, among others. So I'm wondering what you might have to say here.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about just supporting small businesses during this time. I mean, I have a friend who has she has a stand at Seattle Center food stand, and she said actually people have been tipping really well. And it's actually helped a lot in terms of the sales. And so just even in the small ways that we can to support our local vendors, I have quite a few friends who own restaurants and how difficult it is for the ones that have permanent restaurants. And so any way that you can to support local businesses. My family owns a Vietnamese language newspaper, and it's been 40% of the revenue has been cut, and it's not probably going to come back. So I think any way that you can support businesses, like Erin was saying earlier. And the other thing is just friendship. Reach out to people who you haven't talked to in a while. There's so much isolation during the pandemic as well. And even though people are beginning to emerge, it's still, there are lots of people who don't feel safe or ready yet. And I think that even that simple act of just reaching out to someone is something that sometimes you think, oh, there are these, you have to do something really big. And yet actually a text message just to say, hey, it's your birthday today, right? I saw that on Facebook, can mean a lot.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable guidance. For those of you that I know, I am probably the most social person you will ever meet. I love people. I love talking with people, and I feel like a hermit. My youngest is not quite vaccinated yet. He got shot number 1 yesterday. Whoa. Pretty uneventful. But we're still a month and change away from behaving in a non-pandemic way. And I think we're not going to go back. And that's a totally different conversation. But Julie, you're right. I mean, I saw a friend of mine from my middle school PTA online the other day, and I said, oh, I feel like a hermit. And I've given myself to do every day of reaching out to someone, whether it's a text or an email or a message, just saying, hey, thinking of you, haven't talked in a really long time. And you're right, because you forget that it's those human connections that make your community. Now, there's a lot of talk about, oh, well, there's this Facebook group, and we have one and it's great, but it's really about that one-to-one and one-to-few interactions, that are so important. I want to move over and talk a little bit about resources. There are a lot of resources out there, everything from inspiring stories to mentoring, to best practices, to aspirational stories. I like a good aspirational story where I think, oh, I could do that. And this is going to be an all comers, but Laurie, I'm going to have you kick this one off. What's the single most compelling piece of advice that you would offer to working women today, whether they're working or they're thinking about making a switch or coming back?
I'm going to give two.
All right.
So one is a repeat of what I said, is get really clear on what is important or non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. Right. So that really guides when you have that in your heart and in your head, it comes out in interactions, and it speaks to who you are, and you get to be authentically you. And then the other part is to reach out and share what your goal is. Right. And part of that human connections is just reaching out and saying, I wanted to check in and say hi, and this is what's going on in my life. And that's a beautiful form of authentic networking, right? It's sharing who I am. It's sharing what is important to me. It's sharing where I want to go next. And that can blossom into many things.
Yeah.
So
it's hard. And I think many of us are so vulnerable right now. It's hard. I certainly would say that it's hard to be vulnerable. You want to come out and say, everything is going great. Yep, I took my business and I pivoted. We published a book and I homeschooled my kids. And, the reality was there was a goat rodeo at my house for about 15 months, and it's a lot better now. And so I think you're right. I think it's very important to be real and to say, yeah, it's been a really hard year, but things are on the upswing and here's what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for next. Erin, from your perspective, and again, you've got that dual point of
Yeah.
view where you've got, you know, very young women who are working, mostly women working part-time, to working with families. What would be the guidance that you would offer people?
Yeah, I'm glad you called on me because I have seen a ton of moms go through this transition, right? So I've like straight up been the nanny while they've had the interview or like they're contemplating a job offer. And I also have been the first adult they talk to while they're on maternity leave, you know, and they just
Yes.
kind of unload.
Yep.
So I think my advice is just for women to recognize like how much you guys do as a mom, working or not working, like you guys are doing it all. And so I guess my only advice is just recognize what you're doing. And yeah, it was chaos, but you loved it and you got through it, right? So I don't know. I don't have an advice because I'm not a parent, but I think seeing everybody go through it, I'm always like, you have great kids, like your house is in okay shape, like this is great, you know?
But what I like what you're saying, Erin, is that you are, and you know, your childcare providers, sometimes you are the only other adult person besides your partner,
Yeah.
if you have one, that you're talking to
Absolutely.
about your kids and about your
Yeah.
family and this balance point,
Yeah.
you know? And so I think it's okay to say it is good enough right now.
Yeah.
I stopped apologizing for the state of my house a few years ago. And every once in a while I did, I'll tell you a funny story. I was at my daughter's elementary school. I did a PTA. I went to a PTA meeting at one of the women who works with the house, and where, you know, she works nearby. It was at her house. We walked in and it was like out of house beautiful. And she had 2 kids. And I just thought, who lives like this with children? You know, it was crazy. And I came home and I said to Andy, I feel so inadequate. And, you know, and Andy said, no, our house looks lived in, right? We have a family, we have everybody, you know, in and out of here all the time, you know, that house, they probably, you know, aren't there very much. And it's funny, I happened to have a conversation with that parent, and she in fact said, we're never home. Our house looks like that because we don't spend very much time there. And that was good perspective for me. I mean, sometimes it's interesting to ask, but it was shocking. You know, I was like, oh my God, my house is a mess. Who haven't I called on this one? Elizabeth, where are you on this?
I am. So I was actually, again, going to echo a little bit of what Erin said, although I would probably frame it the tiniest bit differently, which is to really focus on reframing how you see your experience and what it is that you're looking to do. So when we're in the thick of it, when we're in the day-to-day, it's really easy to get tunnel vision and to diminish all of the things that we do and say, well, I'm just doing this, or I'm only doing this, and I really want to be doing this. And I think that the pandemic and this forced change that we've all been going through has given us lots of different ways to stretch our muscles or think differently about what our skills are. When I was going through the interview process for this current job that I started about 7 months ago, I had been a senior executive in large multinational companies. I'd had fancy titles. And yet one of my most compelling stories was something I had done with a local PTA because it was impactful. It showed my way to think strategically and creatively about the work that we were doing and showed that I cared about my community, right? And that was something, even as the words were coming out of my mouth in the interview, I was like, I can't believe I'm using this one, but it was so authentic and so right. And it worked. It resonated with the people at the table. And so I think it's hard to find the space to think differently, but I know many of the women on this call, and I have heard many of these women belittle themselves or talk down. And I would just encourage all of you to really think about what it is that you're doing and how you define it. Like, go grab coffee or a virtual coffee with people who know you really well, and, you know, workshop it. Think differently about your skills and where you want to go.
Right, because this is a unique time. You know, a lot of people are using this time to shift. Julie, I know you had talked about in our previous point about reaching out. What else would you have to add here?
Yeah, so I would say ask for help, even if it's a little ask, because We talked about being vulnerable, and one of the most vulnerable things you can do is to ask for help. Often as women, we like to offer help, and yet to ask it can be really painful. And so I'm going to give you 2 examples. And also in asking for help, you get to share your journey. So I'm going to give you a personal example, an example of a friend. So I'm self-publishing my book, and I put out an Indiegogo campaign, and I text messaged 120 people in the 3 days before I launched this campaign. And I said, will you be one of my first 100 donors and just give me $5? And that's the starting. And it was hard to do that. And we were able to actually achieve our goal in 18 hours. And
Wow.
I expected that to, we were going to do that in a month's time. And so and I know that people appreciated me asking directly too. And just like to declare that. I talked to a friend the other day where she had a baby at the beginning of the pandemic. She left the workforce a few years ago because she was unhappy with her work situation. And she'd been kind of job searching for a few years. And this time she put on LinkedIn looking for work. And it's amazing how many people came out of the woodwork. Students that she taught years ago messaged her, and she didn't even remember them because she had so many students. She's like, I want to help you, professor. I was in your class. Like, I want to help you make your next transition. Let me introduce you to so-and-so and so-and-so. And it's because she made a public declaration, which is super vulnerable to do.
Right.
And so I would say, share your journey with people, invite them in, and make a small ask, even if it's, hey, will you like my article that I posted on LinkedIn? It's something.
That I think that it's hard. I have trouble doing that. So I'm going to take that one to heart. I want to ask one last question, and then I think we'll either open it up for Q&A and then maybe go to breakout. And this is, I am looking for advice about how to level the playing field. The pandemic has put women's earning status back about 30 years, and it's going to take 8 years at the current pace to return to pre-pandemic levels. That's pretty sobering. So we've talked a lot about what we can do as individuals. Many of you are working with corporations. And so for everyone on the panel, what do you suggest that corporations do to help level this playing field? Erin, you had talked about having more flexible leave. Do you have anything else to add to that? And I'm going to ask all of you to comment on this.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a story from a friend where she works in an executive position for Gap, and Gap is a very female heavy, majority of the execs are female. Mm-hmm. And she was telling me how they have on-site childcare, and it is just incredible.
Wow.
And we were just talking about what if parents, and specifically working women, were in those higher up conversations of what could make your work ethic and childcare be easier, and that would just be phenomenal. So I guess my fight would be give parents more say in those policies, because it's a win-win, right?
Right. Laurie, you're inside advocating. What are the conversations that you suggest people be having with their peers and with their managers about this?
Well, I'd say have real conversations about what the blockers are to moving forward as an employee. And then as a manager, it's my responsibility, if I take it on, but it is my responsibility to make sure that there's equity across the pay scales as well. So fighting for that extra promotion, not really caring that you took time off. It's what's the impact of the job that you're doing now. I don't care how many hours you're at work. I don't care how many years you've been here, how many years you've got as a gap in your resume. I want to know, what is it, am I paying equivalently? And then a story that I have is I had 2 new hires, both college graduates. One, the young man negotiated, and I almost said, I'm done, either take that. In fact, I did. I said, take the offer or leave it. Right? Because he just, pushed 3 or 4 times, and the young woman did not. A year later, they were both still working for me. They both got reasonable raises, and the disparity between their actual income was significant. And, shortly they were going to be promoted, and then it was going to increase even more. And I said to my manager, I got to do something, right? This isn't right. Look at the quality of their work. They are doing equivalent work. Let's fix this now before it becomes a problem.
Right.
That's just one me doing that. The thing that I want to say that's systemic is you have community groups, or we have community groups, or we have a family's employee resource group. We have a women's at all sorts of levels. We get together and talk about what types of things we need to advocate for. And there's sponsors, and they listen to us, right? We have access to these VPs, the executive VPs, who ask us what is going on, what is blocking us. And it's our responsibility to step up and say, these are the things that we need action on.
Right.
We don't always get what we want,
No.
but we raise it.
Yeah, but you have to speak up, right? I think that's the
In
biggest.
community, it's not just like my lone voice in the wilderness.
Right.
Right. I find a community and I say, I want to be part of this, and together we have more power.
Right. Right. I think this, Julie, I'm going to jump to you on this because you alluded to this earlier about, having to diversify across all levels in an organization. What's some recommendations you would ask companies to do?
Continue to let people work from home.
Yep. I
have not talked to a single person who's like, I want to work at the office full time. Like, there's so yes, please do not revert to butts and seats. So that's what I'd say.
There's, it's funny, there's a Price Waterhouse study that came out a couple months ago, and it was talking about the hybrid work model. And the executives in the study said, oh yes, we want people to be able to work at home 2 days a week. And then they asked the employees and they said, we would like to work at home 3 to 4 days a week, actually. So it's very, very interesting that disconnect is in place. All right, Elizabeth, bring us home on this one.
I have a couple of points to end on this.
Right.
So going back to Laurie's earlier comment about pay equity, I remember, Nancy, years and years ago in one of your earliest swing shift sessions, you had somebody come in and speak. And I was going to speak a little bit later, and she was talking about negotiating your salary as you come in for a job. And I remember her saying, even if you don't feel that you need it, negotiate and push for the women who come behind you.
Right.
And those words have stuck with me for, 3, 4, 5 years, because it is so powerful. It's opening that door, it's forcing the conversation, and it's recognizing that once you step through the door, that is all behind you, right? And you've really taken that step. So I just wanted to end that. From having spent a lot of time inside a large corporation, there was a couple of things that I really felt were important really early on. Part of it is, as leaders, being really honest about the fact that it is hard. The women who came behind us, even if they didn't have children, it is hard to balance a job and life. And I think if we pretend that we're going home to our perfect lives and our perfect homes, it really isn't serving anyone particularly well. And it creates this really difficult standard or expectation to live up to. And with that in mind, then, I think that as leaders and as organizations, we need to change what it is that we celebrate. So it isn't the number of hours that you're in the office or how quickly you respond to an email. It's about the results that you're driving for the organization and the way that it is that you are doing it. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I make a point to do in the office all the time is to admit when I mess up. I have shipped orders incorrectly to customers. It happens, right? And if we can really focus on the fact that we are improving each day, that we are working toward a larger goal, that changes the dynamic with how your team shows up at work, how you focus energy. And it's not about the FaceTime, right? It's about hearing people where they are and helping to smooth that path for them.
Right.
That's at the individual level, and it is hard work. it is so hard, but corporations can really help make that more feasible.
Yep. And that, I mean, that's going to come. There's just starting to have productivity studies coming in now that are showing, you know, frankly, that productivity is actually higher in many organizations that allow at-home work or are able to accommodate that it's higher than it is in the office. And I think we all know why.
And you were able to move that load of laundry in between.
Oh yeah, that's nice too. That's nice too. Mary, this has been I mean, I could talk about this all night. But I know we have a Q&A and a couple of break. How do you want to manage this?
What I'd like to do, thank you all. This is really, we could go on, and so much of what you all have talked about mirrors the work that Impact is doing too, with small, under $2 million budgets, predominantly minority women-run organizations, and also giving that support beyond the check, really being able to say, we want to help you with capacity, we want to help you with sustainability, we want to network with you and make these things happen within your organizations as well. And so I love that. And that's the one thing I do just appreciate about this group is it's women supporting women. It's putting us into that place, whether we're aunties or whether we're mothers or whether we're envisioning, because we are going to look down the road at what this cultural huge shift of a time has been and what it's done to the nature of work for so many going forward. And hopefully we will have elevated and moved beyond some of these and maybe even catapulted to where pay scale and conversations or envisioning work simply around a male perspective is not how we think about. That's not the definition of our work. So we're going to go into breakout sessions if folks are interested. Each of our panelists is going to be in a room. And if this goes the way we have planned, you're going to be able to pick which room that you go into. We'll stay in there for 15 minutes, so you'll get a chance to say hello to each other. If you have a pressing question for your panel member, or want to bring something to the table to discuss, we'd love people to have a little time to dialogue together. And then we'll come back and do a little bit of a closing. If you want, we have books available, so please put your name in the chat and let us know if you'd like a book. We will make sure that you get it. They make perfect stocking stuffers, holiday gifts, and especially for those graduates coming home who have been away. So I love it. But
oh, Donna, awesome.
So, but here we go. So Anna's gonna set us up. You've got their information. Please feel free. If you are having to jump off, that is okay as well. If you just want to hang tight, take a little break and come back for our closing, super. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for going into these breakout sessions and having some time with these dynamic women.
Thank you. Hopefully I'll talk with a couple.